Heartache abounds when a mother goes missing the night after Christmas in 1983 and her brother is killed a mere 6 weeks later while leaving his home. With one family member missing and another murdered, could this all be tied back to the ex-girlfriend of yet another family member? This is the case of Gracie Nash and John Davis. East Fair Nursing Home had been located on Martin Luther King Boulevard in Austin, Texas in 1983. On the night of December 26th, Gracie Nash was leaving work around 11 p.m. She was wearing a white nurse's uniform and she had on a gray jacket which also had a large fur collar on it. After having left work, Gracie Nash was never seen again. She is still missing to this day. It was 2 days after her disappearance that her 1971 green and white Chevrolet car was found. This car had the license plate of PPT621. When officers had inspected the car, they discovered that there was a large amount of dried blood inside. Some clothing was scattered around the scene of the car, and in addition to this, there was evidence that the police have not elaborated on that led them to say that it was obvious to them that there had been a very violent struggle within the car. 6 weeks later, Gracie's brother, John Davis, was leaving from his front door when he was shot and subsequently died. He was murdered, and the police believe that his case is connected to his sister Gracie's. So the two siblings had another brother who is known as Butch, but his real name is Melvin Davis. For the purposes of this video, I will be referring to him as Butch though. So it was 2 months before Gracie disappeared that Butch had broken up with his girlfriend at that time. This woman is Naomi Easley, and Butch had broken up with her, and shortly after that she had come into his home using a key that she had from when she was dating him, and she had a gun with her. However, Butch reported later on that he was able to take the gun away and calm down the situation, and essentially she left. Now, there is absolutely no evidence that this incident was reported at all whatsoever to police at the time. It seems that any information we have on this incident comes from when Butch was speaking with police later on after his sister went missing and his other brother was killed. So, in addition to that incident, it was only a month before Gracie went missing. It was on November 18th that Naomi once again confronted Butch. She did this right outside his home. He had just left his house. Naomi was standing on the corner outside. She approached him and she shot him with the gun. This time she hit him in the wrist. So it was reported to police, and at this point Naomi was charged with aggravated assault. So what ended up happening is that Naomi got out on bail during this time, and she had been given 10 years of probation for the aggravated assault charges. So this means that Naomi was specifically out of jail during the time that both Gracie went missing and John was murdered. Now, something that's very unfortunate about this case is the fact that there is essentially no coverage of it. There are only about 2 articles that were written years later about this case that I've even been able to find any evidence of. And unfortunately, the only way to access these articles are through having a membership at the different newspapers so that I can go through their archives. Unfortunately, I can't afford to do that. So what I do have of the articles comes from somebody who had seen them before they were archived and unavailable to the general public. The articles have essentially been copy and pasted, which is where I did get some of my information, but most of my information does come from sites like the Charlie Project, the Doe Network, things like that. I also did delve into Naomi's specific records. So in 1986, Naomi Easley ended up marrying a Kent Moore. And at this point, she was still on probation. She had 10 years of probation. And it was only 3 years later in 1989 that Naomi Easley Moore, as she is now referred to, shot her husband 5 times in their own home and killed him. This incident occurred on November 6th of 1989, and Naomi Easley Moore was convicted of this murder, and she is still in jail today. Upon being convicted of her husband's murder, Naomi was sentenced to 75 years in prison. She has appealed this conviction multiple times. The most recent time that she appealed this conviction was in 2015, and she is once again able to appeal in January of 2018. So I do believe that this is a great time to try to be getting this case out there, especially if she is going to once again seek an appeal. So at the time of her husband's murder, Naomi claims that she was seeing her pastor in a somewhat intimate sort of way. The way that we know this is that she sent letters to this pastor on multiple occasions, and 2 of these letters were part of her appeal in 1992 of her murder conviction, and these letters were submitted during the original trial, and they showed that Naomi was threatening this pastor, telling him that he needed to come to court and that he had to tell the court that she was with him on the night of her husband's murder. And she said that all of this was happening, but the pastor ended up coming to court. He turned these letters in, and she was unable to seek an appeal on the base of these letters being submitted as evidence because they were not addressed to him in his professional capacity as a pastor, so they were not privileged information. So he was able to turn these in and legally present them as evidence for the case. He did show up and he did testify in the trial just as Easley had asked him. However, he did not say that they had any sort of intimate relationship. He in fact completely denied that. He said that while Naomi had in fact been in his house on a couple of occasions outside of church, she had never been in any sort of intimate or sexual relationship with him, and he had never once even considered it. In addition to this, he flat out stated that Naomi was in fact not at all with him on the night of her husband's murder. So it seems to me to be the most likely case for Gracie Nash and John Davis is that Naomi had a hand in their murders. According to family members, Naomi had been threatening Butch multiple times. In addition to this, she had been threatening his family members. And it is believed that Naomi wanted to get back at Butch, and in some strange way, she decided that to do that, she was going to harm his siblings. Another reason that it's believed that Naomi had a hand in these cases is that a woman had once called Gracie's mother and said that if she wanted her daughter back, then she had to tell her son to drop the charges. The charges that this would be referring to are the aggravated assault charges that Naomi was facing because she had shot Butch in the wrist. In addition to these couple of things, we now know that Naomi, in fact, did murder her husband. She has been convicted of it. She has been in jail for decades because of this, and she has been unable to successfully be granted an appeal trial. So all the evidence in that case points to Naomi having murdered her husband. So we know that she is in fact capable of murder. She shot Butch, she shot her own husband 5 times, and John Davis was shot while walking out of his door, which is surprisingly familiar to how Butch Davis had been walking out of his front door to go to his car when he was shot in the wrist by Naomi, who had been waiting outside of his home. So I believe that Naomi is the most likely suspect in this case. The police had stated back then that they did believe that Gracie and John's cases were connected, and I feel that the most likely reason that they would be connected is because Naomi was trying to get back at Butch, and she did so by choosing to harm his family. Now, of course, we have talked a lot about Naomi. We have talked about her past, her convictions, all of this, and I do strongly believe that she is probably the person that was involved in both of these cases. However, that does not mean that she is in fact the person who committed these atrocities against this family. Unfortunately, we do not have any strong evidence to go off of. There has been almost zero coverage of this case whatsoever, and unfortunately, there just isn't much to go on. So while it's very likely that Naomi may have been the suspect in this case and there's just no evidence to place her at the scene of either of these crimes, we need to keep in mind that there could be a different person who committed these crimes. These crimes could also be completely unrelated. It's so unfortunate to think that something so terrible could happen twice to the same family in less than 2 months. But unfortunately, it can happen. So there is the possibility that these cases were unrelated. There's also the possibility that these cases are related and that Naomi did not have anything to do with them. But there is also, of course, the strong possibility that Naomi either carried out these crimes herself or that she hired somebody to do it for her. We need to talk a little bit more about how this case wasn't really covered in the media from what I've been able to find. There weren't really articles about it at the time that it happened. There was no information circulating. I haven't been able to find anything specific about this case having been covered at all whatsoever at the time that it happened, which is extremely unfortunate. And I feel that unfortunately part of the reason that this could be is because all of the people involved in this case are African American. Now, I'm not accusing anybody of being racist. I'm not accusing the newspapers or the police or anything. All I'm saying is that there wasn't coverage of this case, and unfortunately, it's not unheard of for that to essentially be how it works when people are dealing with cases involving African Americans. And that is something that is just extremely disgusting. It's something that I can't stand. I hate seeing cases that do not have the coverage that they need. And often that's because, people don't want to bring attention to them because it's not, a young white girl, it's just so unfortunate that that's the case. So I don't know 100% that is why there's no coverage of this case, but it is common in cases involving people who are not white, and I feel that this case is something that needs to be brought back to people's attention. Gracie's daughter is still alive from what I've been able to find, and she is still trying to find answers. She's been trying to find answers for decades now, and I really do hope that one day she can find the answers and the justice that she needs. If you believe that you have any information pertaining to this case at all whatsoever, I urge you to contact the Austin Police Department, and you can do that at the number that is on the screen right now. In addition to the number being on the screen now, I will leave the Austin Police Department's phone number in the description box of this video down below. If you have any other theories on this case, please feel free to discuss them in the comments down below, but please remember to remain respectful of Gracie, John, Butch, and their family. Gracie is still looking for answers as to what happened to her mother, where she is. Unfortunately, it's unlikely that her mother is still alive today, though that is, of course, what we hope for. So please, please, please remember to remain respectful of the family members in the comments down below, and I will see you again next week for another video. Goodbye, everyone.